All right, Scott. So let's talk about the next move for McCarthy. What are you hearing are the concessions that he has, again, agreed to, even though we understand from your reporting and others that he had already agreed to a number of concessions that these incalcitrant members of Congress wanted?
Yeah, Vlad, the latest set of concessions reported by CBS News includes seats on the powerful Rules Committee or other top-line committees for members of the House Freedom Caucus, this far-right arm of the House Republican Conference, of which many of these defectors are part of. And the Rules Committee is noteworthy because it has its fingerprints on every piece of legislation that goes through the U.S. House. Also, some expectation or arrangement for the leadership's political campaign arm, McCarthy's political campaign team, to stay out of open primary elections in heavily Republican seats across America. Got to tell you, having watched a lot of these intra-party political fights over the years in Congress, at the end of the rainbow is often some disagreement over campaigns and election strategy by leadership. This one is no different.
So tell us about whether or not there are any, serious alternatives, like other people who actually do want the job as Speaker.
That right there is Kevin McCarthy's potentially most potent piece of leverage at this moment. There doesn't seem to be an alternative who can draw the 218 votes that are needed to become the next House Speaker. He still has that in his hip pocket. This concept of whatever you want to say, whatever you want to do, at the end of the day, all roads come back to me because there's nobody else who can get these votes either. That's his leverage. But the defectors have a piece of leverage that's increasing as well. Matt Gaetz of Florida, Lauren Boebert of Colorado. They tend to cut a very high profile. Throughout this saga, they have been followed by a press corps, cameras and microphones. Let me tell you, Vlad and Anne-Marie, they don't seem to hate that. So they have raised their own profiles and might want to extend this for days or weeks to come.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, you heard our conversation that we had with former Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who is himself a former congressman, say to us that some members of this rebellious group of members of Congress are more interested in their Twitter profiles, their Twitter followers, and what they can say and do on, on right-wing television. I wonder, though, if McCarthy does agree to these concessions, what does that mean for the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives? I mean, if you are just Speaker in name alone, which a lot of people seem to indicate that's all really McCarthy cares about, just being Speaker, just having that title, I mean, what kind of power and what does the office really signify if you have no power?
There is grave concern, Vlad, among the more moderate members of the Republican conference and the closest of McCarthy's allies that everything he gives away to this faction of dissenters weakens him, but also makes it more difficult for him to hold together the group on bigger things still to come. This is supposed to be the easiest vote. Choose a speaker. Done in a few minutes. What about when the more complicated things happen, like keeping the government open, a big spending bill, raising the debt ceiling to prevent financial calamity? When those votes come, what do these 20 do then? And can this Republican conference govern if they're fighting themselves on the simplest of tasks? That's the issue, and that's the trajectory we're facing.
But so Scott, I know we have to wrap, but you raise an interesting point. So let's say that McCarthy gets over the finish line and some of these concessions are put into place. And you mentioned the debt ceiling. You mentioned just paying people salaries, just funding investigations, for example, that might be looking into former President Trump. So what does that mean? Does that mean government just grinds to a halt and the Democrats sit on the sidelines and watch it all burn?
Well, to a degree, the Republican-led U.S. House only has so much lawmaking ability. It's still a Democratic Senate. It's still the Biden administration. So a lot of what they're doing will be messaging anyhow. But when it's time to raise the debt ceiling, watch out what happens in the U.S. House, because it may need to happen with only Republican votes. Democrats needn't help them out with this. They didn't get help from the Republicans when it was their turn. And this Republican conference is nowhere on big issues like that. A political civil war could upend all of it.
Wow.
Scott, thank you very much. So the House is set to convene again at noon Eastern. We'll have updates throughout the morning as negotiations continue on Capitol Hill.